Yes, Jon Jones is ducking Tom Aspinall, or at least he wants to, or at least that's what he's telling folks. He did an interview with Kevin Iole recently, I think a day or two ago at this point. And in the interview, he was asked, hey, are you going to fight Tom Aspinall after you fight Stipe Miocic? And this is what he said.
More than likely not. More than likely not. I feel like Tom Aspinall is, I don't want to say nobody, but he just hasn't proven anything. He hasn't done anything. And I understand that. I mean, he won his belt against Sergey. Sergey just got slaughtered by someone else. So it's just like, I'm not here to gamble someone else making a name off of me. I'm here to compete against the guys where when we look back, 10 years from now, it'd be like Jon Jones fought this guy and that guy and this legend and this champion and this champion. If there were to be a fight of a guy that's still on our UFC roster that would be not only financially worth it, but legacy worth it, it would be Alex Pereira. Alex Pereira and I, we both 37. Yeah, we're both 37 years old. Right now, I weigh about 235. I'm an incredibly light heavyweight. I think Pereira walks around at 240. And I think that fight would go much farther on my legacy than a young man who's cool today and maybe done tomorrow. I remember a time when the whole world thought Johnny Walker was going to be the guy to beat me. And no disrespect for Johnny Walker, but I mean, we all have seen the way his career played out. I've just been here too long to get all excited about someone who's hot today. I'm here for legacy. I've been gambling for way too long to just take random fights.
Guys, you may have heard me talk about this on Submission Radio or even Morning Combat. This is about as textbook a case as ducking gets. This is it. This is it. Ducking, the avoidance of a difficult challenge for an easier one, which is exactly what this is. And it's actually even worse than all of that. I mean, that's just a sort of a basic garden variety definition of ducking. This is that for sure, times a billion. It's actually much worse than that. Folks, if this doesn't count as ducking, then the notion of ducking doesn't exist at all in the sport. That's how bad this is. I've been watching fights for a really long time. I can assure you, I've seen ducking, or at least, again, attempted ducking. We'll see what he ultimately ends up doing at UFC 309 next Saturday. But assuming he intends to follow through with this and go after Poatan and not Tom Aspinall, you will rarely ever in your fight watching life come across ducking this naked, this blatant, this obvious, this inarguable. I don't even know really where to begin with some of this stuff. It's so hard to parse because it's mind-blowing, the level of insanity here that's going on. Folks, why do you have a ranking system? Why do you have a belt system? I understand it's the fight game and the job of the promoter is to put on fights that people want to pay money to see. First of all, if you can't get up for a title unification, the interim belt and the regular belt being unified, that's what that would be, for the heavyweight division, for the heavyweight title, why are you watching this sport? I don't even understand. If that is an afterthought, the title unification at heavyweight, what are we even doing here? I realize that heavyweight is not as prestigious as it once was, but Jon Jones is technically the champion of that division, and Tom Aspinall is the interim champion of this division. This is a hugely important fight, not merely for this division, but for this entire sport. Moreover, if having a belt while the other belt is in recess or absentia or whatever you want to call injury this particular time, but however you want to describe it, he's just not really actively competing, whether you want to call him active or not and get into the whole Dana White thing. I'm not even getting into that. I'm just asking you, what is the point of having a contendership queue, a guy with a belt and another belt, if that architecture ultimately means nothing? Scrap the whole system. That's how bad this would be. If an interim champion who has been defending the interim title, who, like Jon, for all intents and purposes, I realize that Jon has a loss and Tom Aspinall has a loss, but they are both very, very not losses. One was an injury, one was a disqualification over a rule that in certain jurisdictions doesn't even exist anymore. But for all intents and purposes, basically, two undefeated guys, and I know Tom's got, the losses previously, but inside the UFC, basically two undefeated guys trying to unify a belt in one of the most historically important divisions in all of combat sports. If this architecture doesn't mean anything, if trying to push contenders through by getting higher and higher ranks, by beating better and better guys, ultimately get into a title, or in this particular case, an interim title, ultimately doesn't entitle you to a unification, why are we doing it? This is how the sport works. That's the point of the belt system. And I understand the promoter in MMA controls the title. It's not the IBF or the WBC. Fine. And both sides have their problems. And it certainly makes it somewhat less legitimate by virtue of the fact that the promoter controls the title. But I'm just trying to point out to you, what would be the point of having this architecture if even in the case of a long overdue title unification, we can't get it because people want to see a different fight in the end. Which, by the way, we'll get to that in a minute. I'm not even sure that's true, but that certainly in the case of Jon, he has pronounced a desire to have a different fight. What is the point of the architecture? Either it means something at some point or it does not. And if you can't even get to a spot where a guy who has been basically undefeated in the UFC, blowing the doors off of the contenders, can't get a fight when the champion is basically ready and the interim champion is basically ready, there's nothing obstructing this other than will and desire. If that's not ducking, nothing is. And if you can't make this architecture work at that moment in time, it has no value. It means nothing. It only means something because it makes fights like this happen on purpose. That's the most deserving guy. That's the guy with the title. Put them together. Ladies and gentlemen, ask yourself a very basic question. Who is the most deserving number one contender right now in the UFC in any weight class? I'll wait. Actually, I won't. The answer is Tom Aspinall. You can pick any division from men's flyweight all the way up, women's strawweight all the way up. You could even throw in 145, which doesn't even really exist anymore. Who is the number one contender? Who is the most deserving guy? It's Tom Aspinall. And we know that because he's the only other one with the belt, and he has been defending that belt in absentia while the champion has been injured and away. That's the guy. You're telling me that the most deserving number one contender that the UFC has, irrespective of gender or weight class, can't get a title unification, or in this particular case, a title shot, if you want to even call it that, against the champion? What are we doing? How is it possible you can look at this and say, you know what? I just don't really want that fight. I want something else. And by the way, you can have that opinion, but you definitely can't have that opinion and call it not ducking. It is ducking 101. That's what it looks like. Hey, Luke, what's a great example of ducking? Oh, I know. That. An interim title holder defending the title, waiting for an opportunity to unify. Everyone's ready, and he just says no. That is insanity. It is insanity. In fact, I would ask you, name another situation that you can think of where the champion ducked someone else, again, or at least attempted, stated desire to duck someone this badly at any other point in your UFC watching time. The closest would be Tito Ortiz and Chuck Liddell, and they ended up fighting anyway under pressure. I think it was UFC 47. That's the closest I can think of, and Chuck didn't have an interim title. That's like the gold standard up to this point of when you think of what are the biggest ducks, or ducking attempts anyway, in UFC history. Tito did everything he possibly could in terms of public relations or whatever to not make that fight happen. He was ultimately pressured into it, and they made it happen, and lo and behold, he lost. There you go. That has been for years and years and years and years what people have considered to be the gold standard of what ducking looks like. Well, ladies and gentlemen, depending on how things go next Saturday, we might have a new entrant into that. You've got a guy with the belt who is one of the most the most deserving contender on the roster currently, one of the most in UFC history. And that is apparently something that some folks in the sport are willing to look the other way on. Dude, you have lost your mind if you think that is appropriate. You are absolutely out to lunch. And let's get to the point here, which I really think underscores it. I have seen some very confused people that think the Poatan fight is tougher. I mean, what on earth are you thinking? What on earth are you thinking? Are you really saying to yourself that taking the guy who was the middleweight champion for a brief moment in time in this organization is the current light heavyweight champion? By the way, he's awesome. Not going to say he's not good. He's the man. Poatan's the man. Had a phenomenal 2024. In many ways, carried the promotion. This is not bagging on him, but he's not a natural heavyweight, and there are reasons to be concerned about what we think are substandard wrestling skills. You're telling me that's a tougher fight than Tom Aspinall at heavyweight? You've lost your mind. If you think that, you have lost your mind. It is clearly a decision, as Jon says, in part about the amount of acclaim that Poatan has. And does he have more acclaim than a guy like Tom Aspinall up to this point? Yes, he does. He has, again, 2024 was an awesome year for him. He did a lot to really grow his legend in the sport. That part is true, but that's not Jon seeking out the tougher challenge. You think Jon's going to sit there and stand with Poatan for any longer than he has to? Are you lost your mind? No one. This is ridiculous to even suggest. He's not going to do that. Jon does a lot of things and says a lot of things. He's not stupid. And especially when it comes to fighting, he's definitely not stupid. In this particular case, I think he's being risk averse, but he's not being stupid. He understands that's an easier fight to win, and it just so happens that guy also has a lot of the fans' adoration and acclaim. I would much rather have that one. Which, by the way, if he were to drop the title and go, that would still be ducking. You're literally giving up the title so you don't have to fight the other guy and unify and to go do that. But okay, you wouldn't be holding the belt hostage. But can you imagine the scenario of potentially trying to hold on to the belt? And by the way, let's back up a step here. Look who he's fighting on Saturday. I always thought that the argument that was made that Jon ducked Francis was not a very strong argument, and I still think that because there's really no way to know if that's true. Jon had a lot of problems outside the cage during that time, and maybe he was burned out at light heavyweight. There was the pandemic happening at that time, post-February 2020. There could have been a lot of reasons why he was out as long as he was. Could you infer that maybe he didn't want to fight Francis, and so he sat out as long as he did? You could infer that, but you can't prove that. There's really no way to know for sure. This is not ambiguous. He's literally telling people, I don't want to fight the interim champion who is more than earned. That's the guy. Again, the most deserving contender on the roster, irrespective of weight class or gender, one of the most in all of UFC history. I don't want to fight that guy. I want to fight the guy who started his career at middleweight and is from kickboxing. It is textbook ducking. Textbook ducking. And now we have a UFC heavyweight division where you can blame who you want, but Francis isn't here anymore. He still has the lineal MMA title. He's gone. So now there's this vacuum that's been created. Jon has the belt, but he couldn't defend it. Okay, in part because of injury. We all get the story. Tom takes over, is quite active, beating the absolute brakes off of anyone they put in his path unless he gets injured. And then he fought that guy, Curtis Blades, and knocked him out super quickly. And people are going to sit here and tell me, oh yeah, we can just let him sit further so Jon can fight Poatan. And then what happens? I don't expect that Poatan would win, but MMA is crazy. What if Poatan did win? Now what do? You're going to do a rematch? And Tom's going to sit here all this time? It makes no sense. It cannot be. They might actually try. I don't know what the UFC wants to do, and credit to Dana White. He's at least said he believes the winner of Saturday's Jon Jones versus Stipe fight is going to end up fighting Tom Aspinall. We'll see if that ends up happening, which is why I'm making this video. But we've already got a messed up division. You want to mess it up even more by risking that while also ignoring the most deserving contender on the roster? This is insanity. This is insanity. And let me just say something. I don't even buy that Jon Jones versus Poatan is a better actual fight than Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall. Yeah, listen, Poatan is cool as hell. He's got the mystique. He certainly on the feet is an absolute terrorizer. No question about it. But Jon is simply not going to stand with that guy. He is going to take him down and do what Jon Jones does when things like that happens. Tom Aspinall, we don't really know. There's still plenty of questions about him. We don't really know exactly how good he is. But aside from just being the most deserving one, is the natural heavyweight and has some ability to wrestle, both offensively and defensively, and has demonstrated that. He's a much tougher fight. That's actually a much more intriguing fight, and it's for the heavyweight title, and it's a unification, and it's young lion, old line, the whole metaphor, clash of generations is the point I'm trying to get at here. You have all of those things in play, and yet you still have bozos on the internet making absolutely moronic claims that they would rather see him fight Poatan. Dude, get out of here. What a ridiculous argument. What a ridiculous thing to even entertain. It's insanity to even entertain something so silly. Sometimes you'll have a situation with a champion and they'll have a series of contenders, and it can be somewhat unclear exactly who deserves the title. One guy's case is a little stronger than others. Some you don't really know. Merab has kind of played a little bit of this game. He's like, Umar's good, but he's only got one win. I don't think that's the strongest argument, but at least there's some ambiguity here. There's no ambiguity. There's none. Zero. Doesn't exist. There's no ambiguity whatsoever. None of those factors are in play. And by the way, how much grace are we going to give Jon at heavyweight? You mean to tell me we're going to make a fight against Stipe that never should have been made, hasn't fought in 4 years, hasn't won in 5 years. We're going to delay that even another year because of injury. He's going to fight that guy and then also on top of that, not fight Tom Aspinall? This is madness. This is madness. This is, if you're going to do that, please do me and everybody else a favor and just scrap the ranking system, scrap the belt system, do something else in the night. Hand him a big trophy, that's got a fighter at the top of it, and you could show it, give him a big $1 million check, like whatever, some kind of token of appreciation, some kind of thing that looks good on an Instagram photo, and just scrap the belt. We don't need it, and we'll just make this up as we go, because that's what that is. That's making this up as we go. There's nothing else to it. So, do I understand to an extent what Jon's logic is here? Yeah, I get what he's doing. This guy's easier to beat than this guy, and he just so happens to be much more popular. Let's do that. That's not a irrational thought per se. The problem is all of the other factors involved make that impossible. Right now, certainly. Makes it absolutely impossible. To say nothing of the fact that it's actually better when a title contender gets an opportunity to fight the title holder. I realize I both have belts, but I'm simply going to refer to them in that way just for simplicity's sake, where you get this transference of power, this transference of star power of, nothing would ordain Tom Aspinall as like the next guy in the sport than a fight with Jon Jones, especially if you were able to win. Now, if he couldn't, then that's on him. And if Jon wanted to walk away, that's the UFC's problem to solve. I'd be like, hey, no problem. He did what he was supposed to do. He did exactly what he was supposed to do, both in the cage and in terms of giving Tom that opportunity. I don't have anything else to say. He did everything that was possibly asked of him. They already gave this guy a mulligan in giving him the Stipe fight. Then they gave him another mulligan in delaying it a full calendar year after it was an injury. You're going to do that again, all while Tom Aspinall has become the epitome, the apotheosis of undeniable. Why are you watching this sport if you think that? Why? You don't actually care about the sport in any capacity. You want to play with He-Man figures. You want the G.I. Joes to just battle each other in some kind of silly way. You like the idea of what it would mean for Poatan to fight Jon Jones. You'll actually not like the fight as much. You like the idea of it. I don't give a shit about the idea of it. I care about the actual fight itself. And I realize that the rules in this sport get bent a lot. And they get bent in huge ways sometimes a lot. I understand that. I accept that. This is one of those lines in the sand where if you cross it, the whole thing seems to become pointless. Truly, truly pointless. So if that's what you want, advocate for pointlessness. And then we can just do this a whole different way. But ladies and gentlemen, do not come to me with this moronic nonsense that it's not ducking. You can say you like the fight between Jones and Poatan better. I question your judgment completely, but you can say you like that. But you cannot say you like that and also it's not ducking. It is ducking by the book. It doesn't come clearer than that. This will, if he does this, and again, let's see what he does at UFC 309. Let's see if he can win, and let's see what he says afterwards. If he wants to walk away, I don't think that's great either, but I can live with that. I genuinely can live with that to a degree, in part because we can just be done with all of this nonsense. But there is no argument at all to make for Jones Poatan while Aspinall has done what he's done, is who he is, and has earned what he has earned. Get out of here with that crap.